It was a cold evening in downtown Los Angeles, the kind where the chill seeps into your bones and makes you wonder how people survive out here without a home. Elon Musk, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, was walking down an old street known for its bustling markets and struggling locals. He wasn't there as the billionaire everyone knew. No cameras, no entourage, just a man blending into the crowd. As he walked past a dimly lit corner, a frail voice stopped him. "Hey, can you spare $1?" Elon turned to see a homeless man sitting on the pavement, wrapped in a tattered blanket. His eyes, though tired, held a quiet desperation. Elon paused for a moment, studying the man before him. The world saw Elon as a genius, a man who built rockets and revolutionized electric cars. But here, standing face to face with this man who had nothing, Elon felt something different, an urge to understand. Instead of pulling out $1, he knelt beside the man and asked softly, "Why only $1?" The man hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Most people either ignored him or gave him change without a word. But this was different. "I just need enough for a little food," he said quietly, avoiding Elon's gaze. Elon's mind raced with thoughts. How many people like him were out here, invisible to the world? How many stories like his went unheard every day? Elon's heart ached, but instead of showing sympathy, he decided to dig deeper. He leaned in slightly and said, "I'll give you more than $1, but only if you answer one question." The man, confused but intrigued, nodded slowly. Elon's voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. "How did you end up here?" The man looked away, his fingers nervously playing with the edge of his worn blanket. "It's a long story," he muttered. "Try me," Elon replied firmly, his gaze unwavering. There was something about this man's presence. He didn't seem like just another wealthy passerby. After a long pause, the man began to speak, his voice trembling as memories surfaced. But before he could say more, something unexpected happened. A loud commotion interrupted them. A group of rowdy teenagers laughing and pointing at the homeless man. One of them sneered, "Hey, old man, begging again? Thought you'd have enough by now." Elon glanced at the teens, his expression hardening for a brief moment. He could sense the humiliation the man felt. But instead of reacting with anger, Elon calmly stood up and took a step forward, blocking the teens' view of the man. "Why don't you guys keep moving?" Elon said, his tone quiet but firm. The teens exchanged nervous glances, sensing something different about him. One of them mumbled something under his breath, but they eventually backed off, disappearing into the crowd. The homeless man let out a shaky breath, visibly relieved. "Thanks. Not everyone bothers to help." Elon turned back to him, his face thoughtful. "It's not just about helping. It's about understanding why things like this keep happening." He sat down again beside the man, ignoring the cold pavement beneath him. "You were about to tell me how you got here." The man hesitated but eventually started speaking, his voice tinged with pain and regret. "I used to have a normal life, a job, a home, but things can change fast, you know. Lost my job when the company downsized. Couldn't keep up with rent. Before I knew it, I was out here." He paused, glancing at Elon, trying to read his expression. But Elon's face remained calm, though his eyes reflected empathy. As the man continued, Elon's mind wandered briefly. How many systems were broken that allowed people like him to slip through the cracks? "I tried to get back on my feet, but it's hard when nobody wants to give you a chance. You become invisible to the world," the man finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp dollar bill. The man's eyes widened slightly, not because of the money, but because of what Elon said next. "Here's the dollar you asked for, but it won't change your life. What if I gave you a chance instead?" The man blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Elon smiled faintly, leaning in closer. "I mean, what if I help you rebuild your life, not just survive one more night?" The man stared at him in disbelief, his mind racing with questions. But before he could say anything, Elon added, "There's one condition." The man's hands trembled as he clutched the dollar, his voice unsteady. "Condition? What kind of condition?" Elon's gaze softened, but his tone remained resolute. "You have to trust me," he said. "No questions, no second guessing. Just trust that I'll guide you to something better." The man frowned, unsure if this was some kind of cruel joke. After years of being ignored, deceived, and let down, trusting a stranger, even one as unusual as Elon, seemed almost impossible. "Why would you do this for me?" the man asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Elon leaned back, glancing at the busy street around them. "Because I believe every person has potential. Sometimes they just need a little push to find it. And honestly," he paused, his voice lowering, "I've made billions solving big problems. But maybe the real challenge is solving the small ones." The man stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Finally, he nodded, though hesitation lingered in his eyes. "All right, I'll trust you. What happens now?" Elon smiled, pulling out his phone. "Now, we start fixing things." Within moments, Elon was making calls. His voice carried a commanding tone, yet there was a warmth to it, as if he truly cared about what he was arranging. The man could barely follow the rapid conversation. Words like shelter, employment opportunities, and counseling floated through the air. When Elon hung up, he looked at the man with a steady gaze. "First step, a warm place to stay tonight. Tomorrow we rebuild." The man nodded slowly, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. But just as they stood to leave, a voice called out from behind, sharp and accusatory. "Hey, I know you!" Both Elon and the man turned to see a middle-aged woman, her eyes wide with recognition. She pointed at Elon, her voice rising. "You're that billionaire, aren't you? What are you doing here?" The man's stomach sank. Was this the moment the kindness would end? Would Elon walk away now that he'd been recognized? But to his surprise, Elon didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "Just trying to fix a small problem." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to curiosity. "Why would someone like you care about a guy like him?" Elon glanced at the man beside him and then back at the woman. "Because sometimes the smallest ripples create the biggest waves. Watch." He motioned for the man to follow, leaving the woman stunned and speechless. As they walked down the street together, the man couldn't help but glance at Elon with a mix of awe and disbelief. No one had ever treated him with this level of dignity before. "Is this real?" he muttered half to himself. Elon heard him and smiled slightly. "It's as real as you want it to be. This isn't charity, it's a second chance. You'll have to put in the work." They reached a quiet cafe, and Elon led him to a small table in the corner. Ordering 2 coffees, Elon leaned forward, speaking in a low, steady voice. "I've seen people build empires from nothing. All it takes is the right mindset. You've survived on the streets, which means you already have resilience. What you need now is opportunity and someone to believe in you." The man sipped his coffee, feeling warmth he hadn't experienced in years. He looked down at his trembling hands and whispered, "I don't even remember what it's like to work, to be normal." Elon's expression softened. "Normal is overrated. What matters is that you want something better. Do you?" There was a long silence as the man considered Elon's words. His mind replayed countless moments of rejection, fear, and loss. But for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope. He looked up, meeting Elon's gaze directly. "Yes, I want something better." Elon smiled. "Good, because I've arranged something for you. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet a friend of mine who runs a community center. He's helped a lot of people get back on their feet. But remember, this isn't about pity, it's about your potential." Before the man could respond, another figure approached their table. It was the woman from earlier, her expression still filled with curiosity. "I just have to ask," she said, eyeing Elon carefully. "Why do this? Why not just donate to some charity and call it a day?" Elon leaned back in his chair, considering her question. "Because real change doesn't happen through donations alone. It happens when people invest in each other, one person at a time." His words hung in the air, and the woman slowly nodded, her initial suspicion replaced by a thoughtful respect. The man felt a strange sense of pride, as if he were part of something larger than himself. For once, he wasn't just invisible, he mattered. But even as hope began to take root, a lingering fear gnawed at him. What if this was too good to be true? Could he really trust that life would change this time? The following days moved quickly. The man whose name was now revealed to be Thomas met with Elon's friend at the community center, a modest building tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The friend, a former business mogul turned philanthropist, listened carefully to Thomas's story, offering him the kind of guidance that felt like a lifeline rather than charity. By the end of the week, Thomas had secured a job at a local restaurant, a stable roof over his head, and the beginnings of a future he never thought possible. Meanwhile, Elon kept in touch, offering advice when needed and checking in on Thomas's progress. But it wasn't just about the job or the money. It was about teaching Thomas how to believe in himself again. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was real. One evening, as Thomas sat in his small apartment, the phone rang. It was Elon. "How's everything going?" Elon asked casually, but Thomas could sense the genuine interest in his voice. "It's going well," Thomas replied. "Better than I expected. I never thought I'd get this far." Elon chuckled softly. "I knew you could. Just don't forget. This is your journey. I just gave you a little push." There was a pause on the line, and then Elon added, "And remember, change doesn't always happen in big leaps. Sometimes it's the small moments, the ones where you choose to stand up and take that first step." Thomas sat in silence, absorbing the words. He thought back to that cold evening when Elon had offered him a chance, a dollar, and more importantly, belief. Everything had shifted in that moment, but it wasn't just about receiving help. It was about finding the courage to accept it. The next day, as he walked to work, Thomas noticed the same corner where he'd once sat, invisible and forgotten. But today, he wasn't the same man. He was stronger, more hopeful. And as he passed a homeless man asking for change, Thomas didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a dollar, and handed it over with a quiet smile. "Take care of yourself," he said, walking away. The man watched him go, confused but grateful. And in that moment, Thomas understood something deep. He wasn't just part of a system. He was part of a cycle of change, where one small act could ripple out and create something bigger than any single person. As for Elon, he didn't just change Thomas's life. He had shown him, and anyone who would listen, that the smallest gesture of kindness could spark a transformation. And maybe, just maybe, that was how the world would change. Elon's phone rang later that night with a message from his assistant. "There's a man outside asking to speak with you. He says it's urgent." Elon paused, a smile creeping onto his face as he replied, "Tell him to come in." It's time for the next step.